All right, I believe that we are live. Just double checking a couple of things here. We're kind of starting this off for the first time for us and just seeing. Okay, there will be the comments right there. All right, so we are indeed live, and let's get this a little bit more closer to Mr. Toscano. He's better looking than I am.
Well,
But
hello, East Central community and community at large who joined us for this conversation today. It's the first attempt for us to communicate in real time through Facebook, and so please bear with us. Um, and also, I am wearing a mask at all times. However, for the purposes of this conversation, my colleague here, Brandon, will keep his mask on, and I'll take my mask off so you can hear clearly. Uh, but I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are with reentry planning. As we all know, these times have been very uncertain. And with recent developments, we've heard different guidance from our governor, from our education agency commissioner, as well as local officials. And so, all the while, we've known that we have to prepare to reenter in the fall. We know that it's going to look different. We know that what we did in the spring was an emergency response to something that we did not foresee or that we were not prepared for. But that being said, it wasn't adequate to continue to advance learning into the future. And so, what remote learning was in the spring is not what remote learning can be going forward. And so, we've worked really hard to stand up a model that gives us the ability to be flexible, to toggle from any circumstance to another, from a Friday to a Monday, meaning that if conditions improve such that we can have all staff and students in the building at one time, very unlikely, but we're prepared to do that. And if we have to toggle to completely remote learning at any time, that we have the ability to do that in very effective ways and in high quality ways. And then everything in between. And so we were anticipating guidance from the commissioner. We surveyed our community several weeks ago, and we heard loud and clear that the community wanted to know, regardless of what the plan was, give us an idea with enough lead time so we can make family plans, so we can make provisions for healthcare, so we can make decisions about um, the decisions we want to make as a family regarding our child's education. And so July 1st hit, and we made a commitment to start the communication process. Last week, we got guidance from the commissioner that said, for the first time ever, that funding would be allowed for students who are not in school face to face. And so he stood up a couple of options, in person and remote. And if a child is receiving instruction remotely, they can do it in one of two ways. They can do it synchronously, which means logging in like you are today in real time while the instruction is being delivered in the classroom. We use a platform called Google Meet, which enables students who have logged into the classroom to ask questions and interact with other students and their teacher. Students can also access instruction asynchronously, meaning that they can log into their teacher's Google Classroom, upon which they'll have slide decks for them to follow, instructional links, but they'll also have instructional videos that we're creating currently through our curriculum department with teachers and with instructional specialists. But in addition to that, we hope to be able um, to record the Google Meet lessons that are happening daily and post those on the teacher's Google Classroom so that students can go back to them as they're attempting to engage in the assignments that they were given, but also students who are unable to log in real time can go to those lessons as well. And so the information that was sent out to the community today was an overview of those two things. But there is a lot more to come as we get closer to reentry, in part because some of the guidance that we expect to receive will begin to clarify some of the decisions that we'll have to make. But also, we need to give families more time to feel comfortable with the degree to which they're going to be okay putting their kids on buses, the degree to which they're going to be okay sending kids to school, and the confidence they're going to have in the quality of the remote learning tools that we're going to provide teachers for their students. And so what I think I'll do first is kind of go through some of the questions that we saw on social media today, and then hopefully we'll have some time to take questions in real time from the audience. So I've kind of talked a little bit about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous instruction. The important thing to know there is that when students are in school, we count their attendance and we get funding for that. When students are at home streaming live, synchronously, and the teacher can see that the student is in the classroom virtually, then they're also in attendance, and we can receive funding for that. But if asynchronously, we have to use our Google Classroom Learning Management System, which has the ability to monitor when students log in and for how long they've logged in. And through Google Classroom, students can turn in work as well. And if they've done that on a daily basis, then we can also count them in attendance. And that's important not just for funding, but it's important because the commissioner is also not going to waive compulsory attendance requirements. So even if students are at home receiving instruction remotely, they're going to have to be in school. And they're not going to get a pass like we did in the spring. In addition to that, we and the students are going to be held accountable for their learning and progress in learning the curriculum that is taught throughout the course of the year. And so they'll receive grades in accordance with our grading guidelines as if they were in school face-to-face. And so those are things that are different from what we experienced in this past spring. Regarding technology, last spring we deployed technology. We gave Chromebooks, Wi-Fi hotspots to students and families who did not have connectivity at the time. Our intent is to survey families who have made the decision to start the school year remotely and determine what technology they have access to, and then prioritizing that group first and making sure that they have the devices that they need, that they have the connectivity that they need so that they can access instruction synchronously and or asynchronously. And then we're going to survey the entire student body and complete the same exercise, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's very likely that at different points throughout the school year, everybody's going to be remote. And so we have to have students with access to synchronous instruction or asynchronous instruction so that their learning can progress and so that we can account for their attendance. So some questions that came out, probably the most common question today was, well, we hear a lot about hybrid. We hear a lot about students being able to toggle between face-to-face and remote. And the commissioner made it clear last week that a hybrid option was not an option. But if you really think about this idea that students can be in school face-to-face, and if they're sick or if they're experiencing some risk to COVID-19, maybe someone in their family got it and they decide that it's safe, we all mutually decide it's safe for them to stay home, they can access instruction remotely from home. They can access instruction synchronously or asynchronously, which means that at any point in time, the reality is a student who intended to be there face-to-face at any point in time during the week, during the grading period, during the year, could toggle back and forth between face-to-face and in person. What we're going to ask families to do in the next few days is kind of give us an indication of where they currently feel comfortable. Do you feel comfortable sending your kids to school face-to-face? And if we open in the fall and we can follow all of the guidelines that are set forth at that particular time, are you comfortable sending your kid to school? Or regardless of any of that, you're not comfortable. And that's going to help us, at least between now and the start of the year, start some preliminary scheduling. We'll also have campuses connect with all the families that have not reached out and gave us that information, and also answer any questions you might have about transportation and technology. We will follow up with another survey about your intent to ride the bus or your intent or your technology needs, so that we can get those things done as well. And the reason those things are kind of delayed is because the commissioner also said that we cannot ask for certainty until 2 weeks before the school year starts. So the questionnaire that we'll send out in a couple of days is just, um, it's not a commitment. It's just where you currently feel comfortable. 2 weeks before school starts, we're going to ask you again if you intend on coming face to face or if you intend on staying home. And again, I want to emphasize that regardless of which one of those two you commit to, depending on your circumstances, you can toggle between face to face and remote at any time. So the next thing that's going to be happening by the middle of the month is every child is going to receive what we're calling an emergency schedule. Many districts are calling that a hybrid schedule, where some kids are in group 1 and other kids are in group 2. And this would be an emergency situation where we're mandated to not have more than 50% of our student body in any building at any time. In that particular case, we felt it was important for families to know that if we had to deploy that schedule, your child is in this group. So group 1 are students that would come to school on Monday and Tuesday, and group 2 are students that would come on Thursday and Friday. The groups would alternate Wednesdays. So group 1 would come Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday the first week. Group 2 would come Thursday and Friday. And then the second week, group 1 would come Monday and Tuesday, and group 2 would come Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I know that's a lot of information, but those pieces of information are going to come out incrementally, and we made the decision to do that so that we didn't overwhelm you. Now, again, one thing about that emergency schedule that's critical is that if things continue to get worse and the guidance is such like it is right now, where you can't have groups larger than 100, that once upon a time, buildings couldn't have more than 25% of their capacity, filled at any one point in time, that we could flex that emergency schedule in such a way that a larger percent of the students are going to have to go remote during that period of time. So again, we have to stand up a model that gives us the ability to flex really rapidly, but we have to do it in a way that up front families know, am I face to face? Am I remote? Can I toggle between the two? And if we deploy an emergency schedule, am I group 1 or am I group 2? And if we're in that emergency situation, then we would then communicate further, depending on the context, about how many more students we have to have stay home full time until things clear up. And so our hope is that we're going to be able to take advantage of this new guidance that allows us to provide instruction while students are not in the building, and count them as in attendance, to provide a really best fit, flexible instructional delivery option for every family. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the impact on teachers. Teachers are also very concerned right now because there's a lot of uncertainty. Their work is going to have to be very different. And does this mean teachers have to do twice the work and manage students who are at home synchronously while also managing students in person, and also managing students at home asynchronously each and every day, all the time? And on one hand, the answer to that is yes, but on the other hand, we're mitigating what that means for teachers, and we're standing up, very similar to what we did in the spring, tools so that their Google Classrooms are populated with instructional videos, instructional slide decks, so that students in their classes who are connecting asynchronously have everything they need to progress in their learning and submit assignments to teachers' Google Classrooms without the teacher having to do anything in addition to that. What we will do, however, is use Google Meet to capture daily instruction for the students who weren't able to log on synchronously, and post that to the Google Classroom, as I mentioned earlier. So the lift for teachers will be that exercise, and to the extent possible, it won't be more than that. But that's a lot of work that we're going to have to undertake during the month of July with teachers, and also with our curriculum department and our instructional specialist. Several questions about spacing and mask, and how are students going to move around the building and maintain distancing in an effort to ensure their safety. Those are all guidelines that we have to adhere to. They're guidelines that we're adhering to with our employees now, They're guidelines that we adhere to during strength and conditioning. And we have protocols in place like we did during strength and conditioning that if we have exposure, if we have a positive diagnosis by a teacher or students, that we're going to coordinate with the San Antonio Metro Health in accordance with the CDC, and we're going to slow down. And if we have to close, we'll close to conduct contact tracing, disinfecting, make sure that it's safe to re-enter, and make sure that we know everybody that was potentially exposed and that the provisions for quarantining and ensuring everybody's safety are followed. And that's going to result undoubtedly in a lot of intermittent transitions between face-to-face and remote. A lot of questions about lunchtime, and obviously you can't gather large groups of students today. If we were in school today, you couldn't put all the students in the cafeteria at the same time to eat lunch. So we're going to have to do things creatively, distribute lunches in classrooms and in other spaces around the school, stagger lunchtime so large groups of kids aren't convening at any one time, while at the same time making sure that teachers have duty-free lunches for planning purposes and, quite honestly, to get their breath. And so all of those things are also in our emergency plan. Sports is a big question. The UIL is waiting for guidance. The UIL continues to be optimistic that sports are going to be able to happen. But I think that we're all aware of what's going on in the world around us. We're seeing that the Missions baseball season was canceled last night, that the NBA shortened season is at risk again. And if things continue to trend like they are locally with regard to COVID cases, then it's very plausible that we're going to have to focus on teaching and learning, and that those things are going to be at risk extracurricular wise. But we're prepared to have those seasons, to have marching season and band, and for all of our extra co-curricular programs to go on, and to maintain all of the requirements for safety. And we're ready to flex into smaller groups and staggering schedules and all of those sorts of things, as well as canceling those things if the mandate comes down the pipeline. Transportation is a big issue for us as well. There's not definitive guidance about the number of students that can be on buses. The only guidance that we've received, which was early on, was that to maintain all of the guidelines for safety and distancing, you're looking at 14 kids on a 72 passenger bus. The latest tone from the commissioner and the governor was that as long as you sanitize, as long as you sanitize, seats before kids get on and after, wear PPE, etc., that you can have more than that on buses. We're cautiously optimistic. I want to emphasize that safety is our utmost priority for students and staff, and regardless of the politics on this matter, we have to make sure our students are safe, and we have to make sure that our staff are safe, and that at any point in time that is at risk because of transportation, then that also means we might have to flex down to fewer students in our buildings because we can't transport all of them there the way that we would normally do so. So those are all things that we have built into our infrastructure. It's all obviously going to require for all of us to work together, for all of us to be patient, and for all of us to accept the fact that the only certainty right now is that things are going to change. While at the same time, we cannot afford for our kids to not progress academically. We are accountable for that. That is the promise that we make to our community each and every year, is that no kid's going to be left behind academically. And regardless of the conditions that we're in, we have to deliver on that promise. Several questions about specialized programs, specialized learning environments. A lot of our career and technology programs require seat time. They require hands-on experiences, internships and practicums. Those things, those guidelines are going to have to be met, and they're going to have to be met in safe ways. Specialized learning environments are also the services that the students require by statute are going to be delivered, and they're going to be delivered in ways that are acceptable per TEA guidance as well as statute. And in some cases, they'll be delivered in similar ways, just in smaller groups and in more one-to-one kind of situations where that's appropriate. And in other ways, they may be supplemented with remote options where that is appropriate and acceptable as well. Monitoring for illness. What we're currently doing is everything that was included in the mayor's emergency um, this that message last night. The only thing that we're not doing currently with our employees is mandatory temperature checks. We are doing temperature checks for employees who interact with the public, but those are things that we're preparing for students. We haven't made final decisions about the degree to which we're going to do temperature checks, but we know that self-monitoring, self-screening, and checking our own temperatures before we come to work and our children's temperatures before they come to school is paramount. If staff comes to work or if students come to school and they have a fever, it's already too late. So we're going to have to work together as a community to be proactive about that. But at the same time, we need to make sure we have provisions in place to catch it early and to enact our response plans to quarantine while here in our schools and in our buildings and get the appropriate care and guidance from the medical professionals. And those plans are in place. And again, we'll communicate those clearly as we approach reentry. We're open to all of your continued feedback. We're working super closely with the San Antonio Metro Health and CDC and health officials. We have our own internal corps of nurses that are working closely with those organizations to make sure that we're following all of those guidelines and that we're training our staff. We'll teach our students to make sure that we're consistent because everybody has to do their part. It's really our individual and collective behaviors that'll make all the difference. And I think we're all learning that as citizens in this world. So Synchronous is not available pre-K to 2. That's a commissioner decision, and that's for attendance accounting purposes. It doesn't mean that our youngest learners can't, with support at home, log into instruction real time. It just means that we have to do more than that to account for their attendance. And that's a directive from TEA at this point. So pre-K to 2 students do have access to face-to-face. They do have access to remote learning, both synchronous and asynchronous. But in order to account for attendance, we either have to have them face-to-face or we have to engage with them asynchronously in addition to synchronously to meet those requirements for attendance accounting. So lots of questions on the chat. Let's see if we can answer some of those that we didn't address.
So we've got a ton. So let me scroll back up to the top and thank you all for participating right now. We've got 450 viewers and tons of questions. Let's see, the first one, I'm trying to scroll back up to the top. What about after school programs like Challenge?
So after school care programs, we have 2. Challenge is one, Be a Champ is another. And in working with both of those organizations right now, we are still planning to have after school extended learning and care programs at all of our elementary schools. In both of those cases, we're at the mercy of our partners, but both partners are working diligently to stand up after school care and instructional enrichment. And we intend to make sure that our community has access to that, and again, in very safe ways.
And Denise asks, how many kids per classroom?
Oh, thank you for that question, Denise. Following the guidelines, if we were using an 850 square foot classroom, which is an average size classroom in an elementary school, using the models that were given to us, we're talking in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 students. We are not planning for that many if we have to go to an emergency schedule where only some of our students can come into the buildings face to face. We're looking at more like 9 to 11. Now, we also are not naive. We believe that it'll be rare that we can have all of our students in the buildings, but we're expected to prepare for that and we're expected to all be optimistic that that's the reality. On one hand, we know that students do better when they're in the classroom with a teacher in real time, particularly students who maybe struggle a little bit more and need a little bit more support. Um, but we also know that in this environment that we're in, it may not be a reality at all times.
Cassie asked, what if we pay for tuition? How is that being prorated, especially if there's no program to accommodate pre-K through second grade outside the classroom?
Thank you for that question. Great question. So students who are in pre-K um, from families who do have to pay tuition on the sliding scale will only pay full tuition if they're there every day. If they're not there every day, they will pay a daily rate. So it will be prorated based on the days that they are able to attend because of the limitations. So you'll pay the equivalent of the daily rate based on the annual rate your family qualified for.
And some questions about sports. What have you heard from the UIL, especially about contact sports?
So the UIO is, I think, waiting on some definitive direction. As of right now, they're optimistic to stand up all sports and to do so safely, considering all the guidelines that they've been given. As I mentioned earlier, our current state of affairs in our own state and our own city suggests that it's becoming less probable. But long story short, none of that's going to happen here in East Central unless we can assure safety.
I think we touched on this maybe a little bit, but what about special education students with plans?
Yeah, all students in specialized programs, bilingual, gifted and talented, special education, their individualized plans are all going to be met to the extent possible face to face and where appropriate and agreed upon remotely. Um, but because we're in this environment, doesn't waive our responsibility for providing those services to all the children in our various programs. So we're going to make sure that we do that in partnership with the committees that make those decisions, and most importantly, the parents of those children.
Another person asked, my question is, how about parents that have jobs that do not allow flexibility for kids to stay at home?
Yeah, and for those reasons, I think that's why the commissioner is trying to stand up a model that requires districts to offer a face-to-face option for every family, because that's a real problem. And I think our intention is to do that, unless we have to go into an emergency schedule, which is going to be mandated, right? So we're not going to do that unless there's a mandate. And if the mandate comes down the pipe that says, we can't have more than, a certain percentage of our students in the building, then we're going to prioritize those that are the most in need. Some of those may be students that are experiencing homelessness, students that are, experiencing delays in academic progress, severe delays in academic progress. Possibly students of teachers who otherwise wouldn't be in front of kids teaching or providing synchronous instruction. So we have some criteria and we have some priorities, and to the extent possible, we're going to have every kid in school that needs to be in school until we have limitations that prevent us from doing that. And I wish I could say that that isn't a probability, that a kid whose parents have a job that is inflexible won't find themselves at risk from time to time. We saw that happened to all of us in the spring, and it's likely to happen throughout the year next year, and will be a problem we'll have to face and work through until we get on the other side of this whole COVID-19 thing.
Let's see, another one includes, how often is the school classrooms going to get sanitized on a daily basis?
So sanitation is all of our responsibility, from personal sanitation to all of us in our offices and in our classrooms and in the spaces we inhabit, wiping those things down. We have deployed hand sanitizer dispensers in every classroom, in every area of every office, in every facility in our school district, and we have enough materials and supplies to make sure that we never run out. In addition to that, we're providing sanitation wipes for every classroom and every office throughout our school district to make sure that we're wiping surfaces frequently. Um, but again, that's only as good as the behaviors that we're all practicing, right? And we know that we're dealing with children of all ages, and we're going to have to make sure that we're doing a better job of monitoring their frequency of sanitation, hand washing, hand sanitizing, um, and that we're also going to have to monitor ourselves both in our place of work, in our place of school, but also in our personal environments. I think that it's important to at least acknowledge that what we do outside of school as adults and as children could put us all at risk in school. And I can tell you that since this has all happened, the cases of COVID-19 that we've experienced from employees have all come from outside the district into the district. And that's no fault of anybody's, but I think the degree to which we can be careful, follow the guidelines that are being impressed upon us all, hand sanitize, stay out of crowds, even in our home gatherings, be cautious about the size of the groups and our own hand sanitizing and surface disinfection and, the wearing of PPEs and that sort of thing. I think that, if we all do our part, then we can mitigate it better. But we do sanitize frequently. We will sanitize frequently. Our custodial staff will sanitize daily. In addition to traditional disinfection processes, we do have e-mist systems that will be available at every building and in every school. That is a vaporized chemical treatment that make sure that you don't miss any areas of surfaces. And then we partner with an organization called Germ Blast that comes in several times a year to disinfect all of our buses, cafeterias, classrooms, furniture, and will come in between treatments if we have any sort of infections or outbreaks, whether flus, staph infections, and in this case, COVID-19.
What happens if a child is confirmed with being COVID-19 positive?
So number one, we're going to follow the guidelines as directed by San Antonio Metro Health and health professionals. Our protocols thus far have been to the child's quarantined. The child cannot return until they've met all the requirements from the healthcare side. But then we do contact tracing. And after an initial investigation, in the interest of safety, we're going to default to shutdown until we can be certain that we've contained the exposure. Because the thing about it is, you might have a kid who's positive, who's only at the high school, but we've got to be sure that their neighbors who might attend other schools weren't exposed. We've got to be sure that children on the bus weren't exposed. We've got to be sure that they don't have family members or siblings in other areas of the community or our district. And so in the interest of safety, we're going to have to slow down to speed up and be willing to go as far as shutting down until we are certain that we've comprehensively and appropriately addressed the situation before we re-enter.
So a couple of parents have asked, like, what's to stop a parent from sending a child to school if they have a sore throat or something like that? Like in the past, like how they send them with strep throat or flu and it expands. How will this be any different?
Yeah, that's a challenge for all of us as a community to make commitments about doing that, and I know that it's tough not being able to go to work because your child's got a sore throat or a fever. We've all been guilty of feeling like, hey, the fever's not too bad, let's give them some Advil or Tylenol and send them to school. But I think what we've all learned with this particular virus is because it's novel, the risks are just not worth it. And, we're certainly going to be more diligent about monitoring, student disposition, and be more proactive about making sure that we get them connected with the nurse and get them evaluated and not wait for students to say they don't feel good. But again, it's going to take all of us as parents in the community to also monitor closely and be proactive and, err on the side of caution before sending our kids to school. And keep in mind that Although it's going to be very difficult at home, we can provide remote instruction if the child is up to it so that they actually don't miss a day of school or a day of instruction.
Getting some questions about how many hours will a kinder or first grader be required to be logged on the computer for the synchronous learning, and basically, what if a child cannot log in while I'm not home? Will they still be counted there if they're logged in at a later time?
So synchronous, so the rules are 3 hours for elementary and 4 hours a day for secondary. And asynchronously, they can meet those requirements during the school day. They can meet it throughout uh, the day. But in order to be accounted in attendance asynchronously, they had to have met the attendance requirements in that day and had to have submitted evidence of progress. And so there is some flexibility there, which does allow for parents to get home from work and support some of the progress. Um, Again, it's not perfect, particularly for our youngest learners, and we're in the process of trying to stand up some better supports for that, for teachers and for families with their children, particularly the youngest learners. And so I don't have my best answer today for that, but know that we're still working on that and intend to be as prepared as we possibly can be.
Will pre-K students be required to attend school facilities full time?
Our preference is that they're there every day. And again, that's dependent on any requirements that are handed down. So if we're in good shape, if all of the safety guidelines are followed, and we're clear to allow the majority, if not all of our kids to come to school, it's going to benefit everybody greatly. But again, I don't want that to be misinterpreted as we're going to bypass safety in the interest of getting kids to school.
Can parents bring sanitizing sprays and wipes for the classrooms?
At this particular point, with what we've been able to procure and what the agency is going to provide all school districts, I think that we have more than adequate amounts. But I appreciate that question, because there may come a point in time when we really reach out to the community to supplement that, particularly if this is prolonged throughout next year. But as it appears right now, with what we've already got and with what the agency has promised to send us, we're going to have more than enough PPE, enough wipes, enough hand sanitizer, to make sure that we had enough every day throughout the day and throughout the year.
But could the kids carry, Lysol wipes with them or something like that in their
That's a really
backpacks?
good question. My instincts tell me yes, uh, but my experience tells me I've got to look into that a little bit further to make sure that we don't run the risk of some of those things being misused or you know. So we'll log that question as something I need to look into further so that we can communicate broadly out to parents.
And so, talking about maybe recess again, kids having free time outside, not on playground since school is all day. If on the playground, will it be cleaned between grade level play?
Yes, we're going to make sure that all of those areas are sanitized and that when kids are out there, they're appropriately distanced and safe. PPE worn when within 6 feet, and our travel from classrooms to those spaces and from those spaces back into the building. Those protocols that we'll be following will ensure that all of the requirements for safety are met. And again, we'll sanitize all those spaces before kids get there and after each group leaves.
Uh, will school registration be only online this year?
So registration is online. We will have support for families who need face-to-face guidance. If you are a host family and have been a host family, that process this year is going to allow you to do an attestation, updating the information and attesting that it's accurate and submitted. If any of that information is changed or you're a new host family, we'll have to schedule appointments to complete that process. For families who are just rolling over, you can complete the enrollment process online, And if you have any problems with that, please reach out to us on our Talk to Us app, via email, call our Student Services Office, John Hernandez, or reach out to my office, and we'll make sure that we provide the guidance and support that you need to get registered. And I do want to point out that the information that we sent out today is not registration. That's just the beginning of our conversation that we're having today to begin to inform and engage in feedback loops like this as we, really tighten up those plans to reenter in the fall.
Will students that require speech therapy or other learning accommodations be required to go to school instead of online?
In cases like that, if they fall into the category of students that have to be here face to face, to the extent possible, they're going to be here face to face and would be prioritized as such. There are some tools being deployed across the state for services like that are being found to be effective and acceptable. But again, we'll take those on a case-by-case basis, and we wouldn't deploy a service like that for a child if it wasn't going to be effective and appropriate and agreed upon by the committees that make those decisions. And again, most importantly, the parents of the children that we're serving.
How will rotation among classrooms at the high school level be handled?
So depending on the circumstances, some of the things that are being planned out is that students will stay in small groups and to the extent possible, not interact with other groups of students. And then flows of student traffic will be such that they, to the extent possible, will move in one direction so that they're not intersecting. That's going to be impossible to guarantee, but that's where PPEs come in place, as well as hand sanitizing and all of those sorts of things. So, the high school and our secondary, other secondary campuses at junior highs are really mapping those logistics out and ensuring that we've got really tight plans for, again, all of the circumstances that we can find ourselves in. And again, I know I keep saying this, but please do not mistake that safety is our number one priority. My own child goes to school in the district, and like I would want him to be safe, I want all of the children in the district to be safe. Like my wife wants me to be safe, I want the spouses of every employee to know that their loved ones are going to be safe.
Well, will supplies be shared?
So the guidance suggests that supplies are not shared. And should supplies need to be shared, they need to be disinfected and wiped down. And that's a really good question, and it is something that our emergency planning team has addressed in our plan. And some more of that communication will come out as we get closer about how that's going to be assured, how we're going to store student supplies to make sure that they're not commingled, and that in the event that any supplies are shared, that you have assurances, we all have assurances that they're going to be disinfected accordingly.
Will a student be sent home immediately if they state they're not feeling well, or if they come to school with a fever?
So they will be quarantined, and they will be in an environment where they're monitored but isolated. We'll reach out to the family, and our hope is that they'll be available to collect the child and get them the care that they need, so that then we can at the same time determine if we need to do contact tracing and then deploy any response plan that could rise to the level of even temporary closure.
Let's see. So yes, you do have a choice to do remote learning. For those that do remote learning and a student is falling behind, is there any tutoring available for them?
Both tech support and tutorials will be available, and what will stand up has not been stood up with regard to students who are exclusively remote and needing tutorials. But there will be academic support in real time, as well as academic support through a help desk type model, but we have not stood that up yet. Thank you for that question.
Will there be an increase in soap dispensers, sanitizers, always being fully stocked?
Absolutely, and there already has been an increase of both of those deployed throughout the district, and we've got extra stock of all of those things to add those wherever we see opportunities that are identified by us, students, or families.
Uh, is there going to be more than one nurse at each campus?
So we have nurses and assistants, and we have rotating nurses. At this particular time, we have not made the decision to add to our um, healthcare staff, but we have committed to fully staffing whether we're in school or not.
Will you try to keep students grouped together as they move between classes to minimize interaction?
Yeah, to the extent possible, absolutely.
Uh, let's see. Will the students remain in one class while teachers rotate?
That's one possibility that could be considered in some circumstances that some adults may rotate to groups of kids as opposed to the groups of kids rotating. Um, the the extent to which that happens is undetermined at this time, but it is definitely part of our planning because as the question was asked, obviously it makes really good sense to the least amount of people moving around, the better, and there's less adults than students. So a really good recommendation, really good question, and it's definitely something we're considering.
And talking about teachers a little bit, how is teacher safety taken into consideration, and talk a little bit about what we're doing with our teachers.
Yeah, so our teachers are employees, as are all of us employees of organizations. The federal government did um, pass a approve a program called the FFRCA, I believe, that does give some additional options for paid leave and some support for employees who may be struggling with childcare should schools and childcare facilities close. Um, in addition to all of the other benefits that we have for employees to receive payment when they can't be at work. But all employees, like students, are going to complete daily screeners. They'll be monitored closely. We're asking all employees not to come to work if they feel they've been exposed, if they're experiencing any of the symptoms, to include a fever. Um, and, along with students, staff are going to hand sanitize frequently. They're going to wear PPE when they cannot maintain a 6-foot distance. They're going to wipe surfaces down along with our custodial staff and along with our students and staff. Um, but we also know that in all of these cases, we have staff just like we have students and just like we have families who have pre-existing conditions, maybe are immunocompromised, and on a case-by-case basis, we're going to have to support all of those situations.
And I do want to point out real quick, we have close to 500 people watching, and the questions are flying in. So we're not intentionally missing questions. In fact, for us, some of the older ones get bounced out. So, for those of you that have questions that haven't been answered yet, we're trying to get through them. We have absolutely tons to get through, and we're trying our absolute best. Um, it's recommended to quarantine for 14 days once a positive test is confirmed. Teachers and staff are only given 10 days per year. In addition, does that count against the students if they're quarantined?
So fortunately, because of the remote learning provisions, students who are at home quarantined, if they're up to it, depending on their symptoms, they can engage synchronously and asynchronously and still be in attendance.
Okay. And then what about teachers, if they are having to be quarantined?
Yeah, so if they qualify for FFRCA, they'll get 10 days um, with full payment, I believe is the guidance in FFRCA. Anything, and they won't have to use their leave. Anything above and beyond that, we'll have to look at the other options for FMLA, both intermittent and or continuous, as well as their, what they have in their leave pool, as well as the other benefits that we have that could even rise to the level of our different pools and banks that we have that employees contribute to that they may qualify for additional leave.
Um, How often will children have to wear a mask during the day? Is it required for them to wear masks?
So as it stands right now, all employees are required to wear a mask if they cannot maintain a safe 6 foot distance. The same thing, if we were to start school today, would be the requirement for students. But it is possible by the time we start school that's going to be a mandate all day long, with the exceptions being eating, um, health concerns, asthma related concerns, and such. Those guidelines have been set forth by the CDC and Metro Health. But as it stands right now, PPE are required if you can't maintain a safe distance.
Will children be in school for the whole 8 hours?
Remotely, no. If in person, yes. The full school day.
Was plexiglass ever explored as an option?
There are several resources out there like plexiglass that we're exploring. There's some other technologies coming out that seem to be possibilities. Um, the cost of many of those things right now are something that we're looking at resources to support. There's other types of tools out there that are touchless, temperature kiosk and things like that we're exploring. But we're in the exploratory stages of determining the appropriateness of those things and what we need to do to secure the revenue to uh, procure those items.
Amber Miller asked, my question, what is the difference between sending kids to daycare where they do not social distance or wear masks, where they in fact interact all day with one another while they learn and play? Full-time working parents can't teach kids. When they get home from work, it's about 6 p.m. for my husband and I, and my kiddo isn't allowed on technology without me there.
So the daycare question is a good question. My best response to that is what we've learned is that children, we all had this idea that children really don't get, you know, symptoms, that they may have COVID-19, but they're not really negatively affected by it. I think some of the latest medical guidance suggests that on one hand, the student could be exposed and then bring that home and expose parents or grandparents or those that may be more at risk if they were to get COVID-19. But in addition to that, there's, and I'm not going to speak accurately about this, but essentially children who have COVID-19 may never experience symptoms, but their immune system is creating antibodies at a hyper rate that when COVID-19 runs its course, their body continues in some cases to produce those antibodies, which causes a different um, immune system condition that is not communicable, but the symptoms are concerning for children. And so I think that child care facilities are becoming more aware of that, and some of that guidance may be changing. I don't know that for certain, but I think as we get closer to reentry, some of those things might be a challenge, particularly if the rates of positive cases in Bexar County and San Antonio continue to increase.
A lot of these are scenarios. For example, if an assigned classroom teacher comes in contact with a positive case of COVID and a substitute teacher is assigned over, how will the continuous instruction of academic learning be sustained both face to face and remotely?
So these are all case by case. As I kind of mentioned earlier, if a teacher is positive, then the first thing we have to do is quarantine the teacher and do a preliminary investigation with San Antonio Metro Health, which would suggest that all of the students that teacher taught may have been exposed. And then through contact tracing, we might realize that the exposure could be more broad, prompting us to potentially shut the entire school district down for a short amount of time until we can be assured that we know the extent of the exposure, that everybody who is exposed is informed and follows medical guidelines, and that we have an opportunity to disinfect and do what we need to do to prepare for reentry. So, that sounds extreme, but we're gonna err on the side of caution in our response. And for us, it's kind of a slow down to speed up kind of mentality, in the best interest of safety for staff and students.
If a child tests positive, will they have to show proof that they no longer are positive before returning to school?
Yes.
Can we register for in-class learning and then later decide to do remote learning? Can we go back and forth?
So one thing I didn't say earlier about that topic was we're going to request as we get closer to reentry that parents make a soft commitment to face or remote. And again, it's a soft commitment. And the only reason we're asking for that commitment is it helps us with planning for meal delivery. It helps us for planning for bus transportation. It helps us in planning for scheduling and student movement throughout the building. Um, but in no way is that suggesting that you have to make a commitment that is fixed. But if all things are safe, um, in the best case scenario, we'd like to stick to 6 weeks, 6 week periods of time to see if remote learning is going to work for you, or if face to face is going to work best for you. And the degree to which we can do that helps us with all of those logistical plans. It helps us to ensure that kids have consistency and that we can ensure continuity of quality instruction. But again, that's not going to trump safety. So if anywhere along the way remote learning is not working for academic progress, or not working for a family, or face-to-face working isn't working in the interest of safety for a child or their family, then we can toggle, and we'll work through those on a case-by-case basis.
Are we still only going to have two grading periods, fall and spring?
Yes.
All right, there we go. If district goes to shutdown in case there is a positive case, will we make up in the summer?
Thank you for that question. So the board did add days in June as emergency shutdown days. Um, that being said, that was prior to the guidance that came out last week that said remote learning counts as attendance. So if we have to shut down and we can transition to remote learning, then that can still count as a day of school and a day in attendance for every kid who is able to attend remotely. And if that's the case, then that's not a makeup day per se, and that's important because the agency is not going to allow attendance waivers, which we've been able to have in the past when we had to have emergency shutdowns because of weather for a day or two. So those waivers aren't going to happen because we could conduct school remotely. And the degree to which we can do that means we won't have to extend the year into June. A couple of other things we're going to add as tools is we're going to have a schedule ready that we're going to call an emergency shutdown recovery schedule that is going to be like a pep rally schedule at the high school where that particular day it's just a different schedule, right? And that particular schedule might add an hour to the school day for whatever length of time we need to make up the required minutes. Because just because we're in this situation, the agency still requires 75,600 minutes, I believe, a year. And so in order to bank extra minutes or recover minutes from a shutdown, we might deploy that. But again, given that remote learning counts, we may not have to. The other thing that we're considering is just adding 10 minutes to the school day for next year across the district, because in a school year that adds 6 days of instruction in terms of instructional minutes. Again, it's just a tool that will hopefully enable us to ensure all of the instructional time that is required for every child in all of our schools, while at the same time giving us the ability to prevent, to the extent possible, having to extend the school year into June.
Can students do remote learning but still show up for band class, for example?
That is a fantastic question. The same thing could be said for athletics. And so as it stands right now, students in athletics and band who are doing remote learning could, if they're comfortable under the conditions that we require for distancing, PPE, hand sanitation, etc., they could participate, but it has to be outside the school day. So specific example would be a child is remote only. Their athletic period is fourth period, but practice is after school. They could attend practice after school, but they couldn't come to the fourth period class.
Okay. A lot of these we've covered. Just real quick, I want to tell people you could definitely go back in the video and watch Lots of questions about athletics, lots of questions about, the difference between asynchronous and synchronous and some of the other things. So, and like I said, we're trying as best as we can to get through as many questions as possible. Um, will siblings be grouped to the same schedule?
That's another fantastic question. So if we have to enact the emergency schedule, we are scheduling siblings to the same group. So a household of siblings would all be in group one together, for example, regardless of which school they attend. And so in our scheduling that we'll be doing, preliminary scheduling we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks, those are some of the things that we're going to work out. And know that as a parent, if for some reason your emergency schedule that comes in your mailbox shows that your siblings, your children are in a different emergency group, you need to let us know, because we're going to move those students to be in the same group.
I don't think we've ever required people to take COVID tests, but are teachers and staff going to be required to take COVID tests before the school year starts, at least 72 hours prior?
At this particular time, that's not one of our plans. I do believe that it appears that the ability for the city to administer COVID tests broadly is increasing. I did see recently that there's even a rapid test that is being deployed and proven to be reliable. My hope is that tests are way more accessible, and that if we intend to do that, that it is supported by guidance from city officials, the commissioner, and hopefully all the way up to the governor's office, because that's going to require some resources, and hopefully those resources enable folks to get quick access to that, and again, in a way that's reliable.
And then what about lunches? I think we touched on it earlier, but just talking about how the lunch procedures will work at schools, and then also if the pickup and go meals
Yeah.
are still available.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, lunches will be staggered throughout the day. Lunches will be distributed to students spread throughout the building, in classrooms, in other spaces, and in the cafeteria. Whatever we have to do to keep groups small and keep interaction of students to a minimum. We will still have curbside distribution every day. And as of right now, I believe we're at 5 locations in the school district, and we'll make sure to share that information in advance of the school year starting. But we will be providing pickup meals for families who are remote.
Jennifer asked, why are students that attend face-to-face required to attend 8 to 8 hours a day, but students doing remote learning are only required to be logged on 3 to 4 hours per day? How are educational hour requirements met?
Really good question. I think that the rationale behind the guidance from the agency is first and foremost that there's not transition time between class periods, transition time to lunches, and so some of that time when taken out of the day shortens the day. And then in addition to that, remote learning is not the same as face-to-face, and so not only is it maybe less appropriate for students to have the same amount of time when it's remote, but it's also very difficult on families to support that learning beyond the 3 or 4 hour threshold. So that is the decision that the agency has made, and my understanding is that is their rationale, and to a large degree, I would agree with that.
It says, when will the special education staff be available to answer questions, or when does the staff officially go back to work?
So I'm finding that this platform is really fantastic for community conversation, and I think that I'm going to engage in these more routinely, but that departmentally, this is also a platform that different departments, athletics, fine arts, special education, that we could, through media such as this, we can have real-time conversations with the community. On one hand, to get good feedback. I mean, I've gotten tremendous feedback through your questions today, but also to answer some questions that maybe we have not communicated effectively yet. And so to that question, it is duly noted that we're going to make sure that we connect special education staff and other departmental staff to the community in this way going forward with effective frequency.
Denise said, and I know the school supply list was recently updated, uh, but can it be updated so that every student brings markers and crayons at this time and has boys bringing markers and girls bringing crayons, which would suggest sharing supplies?
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And we're noting to take a look at the supply list and to ensure that we amend the list so that it reflects the desire to um, minimize the degree to which students are sharing supplies. So thank you for that question.
And then I believe we touched on after school programs, but when can parents start expecting to be contacted and let know about after school programs?
So we're currently working again with the San Antonio Challenge folks through the it's administered through the YMCA and the Be a Champion folks. I think some of their constraints are determining what it's going to take to staff up to ensure that all the guidelines are met that are consistent with the way that we're operating. And so I think we're hoping to follow the same timelines that we'd followed in previous years, but the details on their end have not been solidified. Um, so we'll note down that we want to revisit the timeline that we've previously used and to the extent possible, follow those same guidelines and make sure that we get that information out to you in the appropriate timeframes.
We did have strength and conditioning pause for a little bit. There was a coach that was exposed. Was there an email or anything sent out whether the coach was positive or negative?
Um, yes, we did send out correspondence. I can tell you that in that correspondence, um, it clearly communicated the coach was wearing gloves, the coach was wearing a mask, and that his concern for exposure was exposure over the weekend prior to returning to work. And so, out of an abundance of caution, we went ahead and shut it down because the coach did check in students as they were arriving. And so at this particular time, I believe the quarantine period has been exhausted, but we're still not returning to strength and conditioning, more because of the current context of increasing positive rates of COVID-19.
Will there be a limit to how many students are able to be at the school campuses if they choose to go back?
Again, as of the guidance last week, there are no limits, which we all know is doesn't seem to be appropriate. But we are, again, we're preparing for all students and staff to come back, which we may not happen at the start of the year, but it may happen later in the year. But our emergency plan is probably going to be the most common plan if things don't improve quickly and prove to do better than our last go around in the city. And then within that emergency plan, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the requirements for capacity in our buildings, that will dictate on my answer to that question. So we'll be able to flex down to all remote to 20%, 30%, 50%, up to 75% in the emergency scheduling model. So we're going to adhere to all directives.
Can you clarify again the length of the school day?
Usually it's around 7 hours. Our current school schedules for this year are on the website. And I'm not looking at it right now, and I would say as superintendent, that's an answer that I should be able to rattle off. But we have, kind of played with that year over year in recent years, and we're going to add 10 minutes to it again, potentially for next year for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So generally in the neighborhood of 7 hours.
Will high school students still be able to travel off campus for healthcare careers and return back to campus?
So when I mentioned CTE programs, that would be an example of one of them. we're working very closely with our partners. The commissioner is soon as tomorrow or early next week supposed to give us guidance on those programs, to tell us to give us more direction on if we can continue with those practicums that was represented by that question. Our hope is that we can, and our hope is that we can feel confident in the safety guidelines that are going to be in place. But our career and technology programs, preparing our kids for the workforce, are critical to their experience in our educational process, and for them to not have those opportunities would be um, a really sad state of affairs. So we're going to make every effort to work together with all of our partners to make those things happen. But again, we need that guidance from the agency.
Is the district required to support families with curriculum if the parents choose to homeschool, not distance learning?
That's a really great question. So when a child chooses to homeschool, they're not enrolled in ECISD. Historically, we've always worked with families in our community who, whether enrolled or not. The beauty of this question today is that our curriculum toolkit will provide access to many of the resources that I've been describing. I would encourage families who are considering homeschool next year to enroll in ECISD and to choose the remote full-time option, because you'll have access to all of our curriculum and instruction materials. You'll have access to real-time instruction to support the instruction that you're providing at home in your homeschool program. And I think it would just be additive in that way.
Celeste said that the concept of groups is inconvenient because the students can't go back and forth, and to her, she doesn't like that.
Yeah, I agree with Celeste. And a lot of things have really been inconvenient for all of us with many of these requirements, whether we're going grocery shopping or trying to get our hair done. But similarly, not being able to experience our day-to-day school experiences is definitely going to be inconvenience. And to the degree that we can get back to normal, we'd love to do that, and we're prepared to do that. But again, we've got to err on the side of safety precautions at all times.
Has there been an answer yet regarding special ed students being required to wear masks?
Um, Same answer as earlier, in that all students are required to wear masks, and staff, if they can't maintain 6-foot distancing. But some students have pre-existing conditions and or may be around other students with conditions that may warrant a collaborative decision for students in that environment, or particular students, to wear a mask at all times. We'll work on a case-by-case basis to make sure that all safety precautions are taken, given the circumstances that individual students and groups of students are in.
What about students in NJHS? Are they still able to participate in community service and things like that?
Yes.
That was easy. And yes, we will make a frequently asked questions document. We will post that online. What will the off-campus practices classes look like?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I didn't get that one either. Um, let's see. Is there a supply list for kids going through the remote program, through the remote learning?
Say that again.
Is there a supply list that kids going through the remote learning may need?
Thank you for that question. We'll make sure that we have a supply list for those students. I want to add that there was a question that I saw pop up about students who are remote learning, that they should have the opportunity to have the same number of access to the same number of instructional minutes of students in person. And I'll respond to that by saying, as a student in remote learning, you have access to instruction all day long for every class that your child would normally be in face to face, as well as additional opportunities to access the resources that'll be available in Google Classroom asynchronously. The reality of it is the 3 or 4 hours is a minimum requirement, but students can go above and beyond that in real time, as well as asynchronously. It's a really good question, and it is definitely not limiting. The requirements are not limiting.
Will there be some type of technology in the classrooms so that the students who want to stay home can get the daily lessons as the teachers are teaching?
Through Google Meet. It'll be very similar to what we're experiencing today. We are exploring other technology resources. There's technology out there called Swivel, which enables it's better than a laptop like we have right now because the swivel can allow the device to be mounted on it. And I would, if I was teaching, I would have a fob on my person, and everywhere I went, it would follow me around so that it feels more like real instruction as opposed to the teacher being required to be stationary or someone required to move the monitor around. So there are more appropriate technologies that we're exploring and deploying in areas of the district to test and eventually scale.
And will students attending class in person, they will still have access to their laptops and such, right? Or do the remote learners have priority?
So we'll start with the remote learners. We did order an additional 500 Chromebooks and intend to order more when they're available. As you can imagine, um, the demand for those things has been exponential, and the supply can't match that. Fortunately, we were able to get out in front of some of that. Um, and so our intent is to make sure that we can supplement the resources that families already have to ensure that every child, if we were to be full remote, has the ability to access instruction uh, at the very least asynchronously on a daily basis.
Um, just a comment, school at home is not the same as in person. I agree with the current plan with home students having less class hours to complete.
And I think the key there is that it gives families options and it gives families flexibility. Every household circumstance is different and every child's needs are different. And so, again, everything we're doing hopefully really emphasizes the choices that you have and really emphasizes our ability to help you find a best fit situation within the parameters and guidelines that TEA is mandating. And so, to the extent possible, we want to make sure that we're meeting your household needs and your individual student needs.
And then just to clarify again, the remote learning for K through second is not live, is not synchronous, it is asynchronous, correct?
Well, I'm going to state that again.
All right.
So there will be synchronous instruction. It's just for attendance accounting purposes. The agency isn't allowing us to say, to look at a 4-year-old child on the end of the computer and say, "Yep, they were here and they learned what they needed to learn." I think the assumption that the agency is making, or what they're basing that on, is that the youngest learners, we have to engage with them more than just seeing them on the other end of the monitor to ensure that we have enough evidence that they made progress that day. So I think it's the agency's attempt to make sure that we're not settling for academic success or progress just because they logged in.
And then, and why someone mentioned Texas A&M University and said they're doing like 2 days on, 3 days off, or something like that. Why are we not doing something similar to what they are doing?
So to that's the emergency schedule that your child will receive in the next few weeks. And again, we're not going to do that on the front end because um, we don't want to mandate to families day one that your kid can only come to school 2 or 3 days a week on any given week. We want to flex to that if we're mandated to do that because we believe that having kids in school every day is best for all kids and it's best for our school system. But the reality of that in this COVID-19 condition is that it's less likely that that's going to be the reality. So, like A&M San Antonio, we do have a plan that allows for 2 different groups of students, um, again, within which we can increase the number of students remote and decrease the number of students face to face to meet any limitation requirements, while at the same time um, offering those schedules that are part face to face and part remote.
Okay. Some questions again about teachers and employees. Uh, when will teachers be notified about some of the responsibilities they will be taking on? And, you know, can you do a Q&A for each campus?
Q&A for each campus.
Yeah.
So we'll do a district Q&A. Campus principals, campus staff will follow suit with their own site-specific Q&A. I think that's a really good recommendation. I'm down to 1%. We better get my charger. Brandon, if you don't mind, it's in my backpack side pocket.
In there?
Yes, sir.
All right. I think you can scroll on the side. I could see some comments too.
In full disclosure, Essential Community, this is my first time on Facebook ever. Not just Facebook Live, but Facebook ever. And so this has been very interesting, very beneficial for me. I hope beneficial for you. Again, I intend to do this with increasing frequency and get more staff in front of you guys to make sure that we're getting the feedback that we need, and at the same time informing our staff and our community. Our staff will receive a letter from me tonight that kind of gives an overview of many of the things we've been talking about today, and we'll also let them know that our intentions are to remove so many of the burdens that would otherwise be placed upon them due to the varying learning formats that we're going to offer in the fall. And so I think that'll relieve much of the anxiety that they have, but certainly not all of it. And we'll work together with staff and as a community to make sure that we create the best conditions possible among a host of not perfect possibilities. Oh, wow. This is great. I see a whole bunch of former students on here. That's very interesting, and it's telling when many of our former students that were junior high students of mine or high school students of mine are asking questions about their students in our school system. It's great to see all of you, and great to still have the opportunity to serve your children in the East Central community.
Actually, I probably know exactly where it's at. Behind the scenes.
You have to plug it in over there. Here, put that in the side. How much longer do you think we should go?
Can we get it? I think we got it. Charging?
All right, we got a charger in.
Lots of great job. Let's do maybe like another 5 minutes.
Okay.
And if you missed any thing that we've said, a lot of the stuff we've already touched upon. Someone that said Hope EC face mask will be available to purchase for students and adults, but I think that's more of a responsibility.
There's a. Can I go down on these questions?
Yes.
Because there was a question, really good
See
question.
that gray bar?
Okay. How do I go up?
It might have already fallen off.
Folks, it looks like we're starting to see some of the same questions that I think I've been able to address this evening. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up today, but as promised, we'll do this at least on a weekly basis until we all feel a little more comfortable with the plan for the fall. Again, I appreciate all of you participating tonight. Your questions were fantastic. Your feedback was very affirming and also gave us some direction to continue to refine some of the work that we're doing. I want all of you to thank our teachers and staff across the district if you see them. They're as anxious as you are. It's very stressful times for them. There's a lot of uncertainty for our staff, and we're going to mitigate as much of it as possible. Happy staff, happy students. It's going to be a process, and we're going to get through this together as a community. And at the end of the day, we're going to make sure that no students are left behind, just like no staff are left behind. And we're going to use this this time as an opportunity to do things better than ever before, to learn things we never imagined were possible. And we should all be excited and proud of our staff and our students and our community because we're in a great place and we got a bright future in front of us. So we'll continue to communicate with our staff and our community in the channels that we have, but we'll also connect in real time so that we can get, good feedback from you guys, and we can answer any questions that maybe our communication is short on. So great to be with you all tonight. Look forward to our next time together. Appreciate you all, and until we meet again.